Welcome again to Capitol Hill. I, of course, am Alan Freedom, and Adam Preston is still not here. He is spending time up in the high mountains in the Himalayas, learning from a bunch of ninjas how to be a superhero. He'll be back maybe next summer. With me tonight is Dr. Jackson. Welcome to the program.
Howdy, Alan. Good to see you, or hear you at least. Uh, Glad to know that Adam is off getting his butt kicked. So,
He's got to get over his fear of small rodents. Uh, Otherwise, he will never be the superhero that we deserve. Um,
yes.
so, a lot of activity in Congress. We'll start with a little squabble over the Protection of the Assaulted Act. Um, that had quite a bit of press time.
Oh yeah.
Democrats submitted a bill. The GOP admittedly snubbed the bill entirely and wrote a similar bill and submitted their own. DNC didn't like that. Accused Representative Rapperby, who wrote the GOP bill, of plagiarism, which was not
Mm-hmm.
exactly true. Um, Although he was being very partisan by snubbing the other bill entirely. Um, and then that was about it. That was the whole history of the event, really. And now the Protection of the Assaulted Act of 2018, which is the Rapperby bill, is, I think, finally going to a vote. Yes, it's finally in a vote.
Yes.
Um, so it'll be interesting to see if the DNC. Oh yeah, looks it's got unanimous support so far, which is good. So they finally got over their little division there and passing a good bipartisan bill.
Forced bipartisanship, better than no bipartisanship. There's something interesting about that bill that I noticed, though. All the verbiage for it, the requirements, the demands, the mandates that may or may not have adequate funding to go with them, all seem to be for big cities. Everything is for uh, for settlements with populations of 250,000 or more. What about for folks in smaller towns and in rural areas where sexual assault still happens in the middle of Oklahoma or in the Northern Marianas Islands? Even though there may not be a lot of folks there, it still happens. And so, are those police departments going to get any support?
That's a fair point. It does tend to focus mostly on big university campuses and big cities, where admittedly most of the assaults probably happen, but they still do happen in rural areas. That's a very good point. I wish someone would have brought that point up to Congress before they're about to pass it. Maybe they can amend it in the Senate. Um, that's a fair point.
And
Uh,
maybe most by number in the cities, but the percentages are about the same, even slightly higher in rural areas. I just want to throw that out there.
I stand corrected. And then after that, the next big commotion was over the defunding of Planned Parenthood and passing of the Born Alive Protection Act. Um, that one was significant for a couple different reasons. One, there were actually a lot of Democrats who shifted very far right, if not centrist right, on that issue, especially on the abortion bill. Not so much on the Planned Parenthood bill. They tended to stay pretty united against that. Um, do you think this is perhaps a shift
Shift in.
in the party? Because this is quite a different stance from the platform of Hillary Clinton or Obama or even Clinton.
Well, I would argue that this is not so much a shift in the party, but a good thing, highlighting the diversity within the party. right? With Republican stuff, we often see every Republican who maybe even in the public and the media be like, "Oh, this is so terrible," but then go and vote down the party line because that's all they do. Versus we see these Democrats where there's a difference of opinion, but instead of just blindly following what the party line is, they actually think for themselves and are advocating on behalf of their constituents.
Yeah. The only congressman who didn't shift was Congressman Gonzalez. He stayed pretty far left when it came to all abortion and Planned Parenthood, whereas others started other Democratic congressmen like Congressman Wong, Congressman Ward were completely 100% pro-life, which is almost very far right. Um, could this be a sort of attempt to uh, uh, appeal to the moderate voters?
Um, I like to be optimistic and say that for the majority of our representatives in Congress, their actions are motivated by truly wanting to represent all their constituents, as opposed to merely acting in a way to get reelected. But that is a very valid question, Alan.
Because Representative Gonzalez, for example, he is only popular among two
Alan?
constituency. Yes,
Oh,
we are having some technical difficulties for the 14th time. You just didn't hear the other 13 attempts. Can you hear me now, Doctor? Can you hear me?
I can hear you now.
Okay, so I was saying Representative Gonzalez, he is only popular among two constituency groups.
Yes.
Um, the farther leftist SJW crowd and
Yes.
the more mainstream progressives, and a
Progressive.
little bit among moderates, but pretty much he's burned any bridges past that.
Yeah, I think I don't think Representative Gonzalez. I don't think he either represents the party line either. Just like the some of the ones that are going right and far right on this issue don't necessarily represent the party as a whole. I think Representative Gonzalez is just another beautiful piece of this mosaic we call the Democratic Party. Um, and I think he is has really tapped into kind of the fervor awoken by Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016.
Yeah, he seems very Sanders-esque in that way.
That he does. That he does.
Moving on to immigration, that's the
Well, I
latest.
did have a I
Oh,
had a question for you because I know we don't necessarily see eye to eye on this. How do you think the states are responding? Because I know the Oregon governor, she's been kind of loud over not just the Me Too movement, but she's made a few public statements about these upcoming Planned Parenthood and life birth abortion acts. How do you think the state governors and state legislatures are kind of dealing with this going forward?
um, I think a lot of state legislatures, especially GOP-controlled state legislatures, which is almost a majority of them, I believe, will take this as a sign of the times to move forward with their pro-life legislation. I think for the Democratic controlled legislatures, it will be almost a panic, and they'll try and do whatever they can on the state level to resist it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that Congress may not have thought about is the fact that Planned Parenthood is the largest provider of healthcare services for women, um, not just in urban areas but also rural areas. And they have a further reach than what a lot of public health departments can do. So, in the amount of money that Congress is saying that they want to reposition to these public health services, isn't going to be enough to hire the staff and to build the buildings that's going to be required to kind of replace the same kind of reach that Planned Parenthood has, while also maintaining the current level of services being offered.
If I may correct, that's actually very mistaken and untrue. 95% of their services is abortion. They don't even have
Uh,
mammograms, despite the fact that Cecil Richards keeps insisting that there are, but they actually don't. Um, but I can actually show you a map of the Planned Parenthood sites across the country versus the other health clinics that are not Planned Parenthood and
mhm.
don't offer abortions, and it's actually quite a lot compared to the very few Planned Parenthood. So, if the argument is that without Planned Parenthood there won't be clinics, that's kind of a dishonest argument.
I don't think the argument is that without Planned Parenthood, there wouldn't be clinics. And I don't know where you got the 95% are abortions of what they do. That is a flat out lie. But what I argued is it's going to be hard to replace what's being lost and still maintain the current quality that's there, while states try to figure out how to fill in this gap that's now being created.
My statistic was looking at the
Alan?
primary. Yes, you're still there?
More technical.
You still there? Try and stick with us, folks. We're doing the best we can. You with us? I can hear you. Can you hear me? And I've lost him. I will try and get him back momentarily. Enjoy this music. Actually, I got my 95% from Planned Parenthood based on the primary reason for the person coming in, the primary service they're going to. Planned Parenthood responded with a flat out lie that only 3% of their business was abortions, but that was skewing the facts using misleading math and using the other um, accidental reasons or accidental services given uh, past the primary reason in order to skew the statistics. But actually, if you look at their primary reason for coming in, 95% of that is abortions.
We disagree on this. However, the bigger question that I had is that how are states how is Congress going to help states kind of make up the gap? So even is only one healthcare provider for low income women. It is a matter of being able for states to be able to maintain the current level of care and services they provide while also increasing that number to match what's being left. And that's going to be having more staff, having more physical space, and having more expertise focused on making sure that women can get the health care services that they need. And remember, the Supreme Court did rule that there cannot be an undue burden placed on a woman who's seeking a legal abortion. So that's still something that the state's going to have to figure out how they're going to provide.
Yeah, so we're going to move on to immigration. That's another big issue in Capitol Hill right now. In fact, there's a pretty big CNN town hall going on tonight um, where there are several congressmen and other influential people coming to talk about it. One of the issues is the Visa Overstay Act that passed Congress. Um, and I think you were telling me something before we went on air, and I'd like you to repeat it on air about the redundancy of the Visa Overstay Act.
Yes. I mean, you said it right there. This is a redundant act. Uh, the State Department already has made illegal. It's already on the books. It's illegal for people to overstay their visas, whether that's a student visa, whether that's a work visa, whether that's a tourist visa, regardless of what kind of visa you have. It is illegal for you to overstay it. That's already on the books. There's a lot of talk about this being a symbolic gesture, and my argument against that was if this is something that's primarily symbolic, one, let's not waste the taxpayers' time and money by having this in Congress. You easily could have just released press statements saying that, hey, we stand by the laws we have about visa enforcement.
So,
Secondly, Congress can initiate funding, one time, few time funding requests to help bolster INS and help bolster the State Department, which the State Department is the ones that issue the visas, so that they can enforce the laws we already have and keep better track of who's here and who's been here for too long. Because as we all know, the majority of undocumented persons in this country are folks who overstay their visas.
right, and I think the GOP would be behind such a funding in order to help fund ICE better, enforce the border security better. The real question would be whether the Democrats would agree with that.
To speak to your point, you said two things I did not say. So I said they need to better fund the State Department, so the State Department has a better way of being able to keep track of who's here and who's not, because the highest percentage of undocumented persons in this country are folks who overstay their visas. You said something about border security, which I imagine most Democrats would say, no, the border is already plenty secure. We can update some things, but for the most part, it's not a bunch of folks flooding across our two land borders. It's folks who come here legally and then overstay what they're legally allowed to stay here for. Um, and so, yes, I think if you want to, I think if GOP puts forward bills that waste money by throwing it at a problem that's not as bad as they think it is, then yes, I think the Democrats will stand up against that. But if the GOP wants to better fund the State Department, which actually runs the visa program, then I think that is something that would be a very bipartisan initiative.
Well, I guess the question would be whether Democrats would support more funding for the State Department or whether they grandstand in the name of mass amnesty, which is usually the line they take.
Uh, I think you say amnesty, where most Democrats would say compassion and understanding. Um, Everyone has their own reasons. If the State Department had more money, they could. I mean, justice means that everyone gets to be adjudicated, right?
Right.
So if we go and we find
Justice
all the
means
folks
that
who
if you break the law, you have to pay the consequences. And
that's only one part of
going
justice.
into our country illegally is a crime.
But we're not talking about folks who enter illegally. We're talking about folks who overstay their welcome.
Also a crime.
Yes, but that doesn't mean you just throw them out without understanding why they're here. Um,
Well, but
I can
isn't
tell you, as someone who's worked with a lot of folks on student visas, I can tell you the visa system is really complicated. It's really hard, and it takes a very long time. So for a lot of folks, they're just in between visa and visa, and so they either can't afford, or it doesn't make sense, or they're in the middle classes and they can't just pick up and leave for a month and then come back. That's the kind of thing the State Department can work on to keep better track of who's here and who has a legitimate reason for being here, and who's here because they came in and they're not leaving. Again, that's something the State Department can keep better track of with better funding.
and
Um,
I'd
and
agree.
I don't think most Democrats would argue that the State Department shouldn't be doing that. And I think when you talk about bills like pathways to citizenship, or pathways for folks to become documented or to re-become documented for anything like that, I don't think there's any sensible plan out there where there's not punishment, usually in the form of high fines and longer waiting periods,
Well,
which.
I'd quote Marco
As
Rubio and say that path to citizenship, quote unquote, is just coded talk for amnesty. And I'd agree with the
I
State
think
Department.
that's just the way how you want to define it. I mean, you can say anything you want is amnesty. It doesn't make it true. If you're paying an extra few $1,000s on a process that already costs $10,000 to $14,000, and you're having to spend an extra 5 to 10 years on a process that already takes 10 to 15 years, I don't. I think that's plenty punishment in itself. And most
Yeah,
people don't even want citizenship; they just want green cards or they want longer form visas,
right.
which are not citizenship.
Right, but Dr. Jackson, you used the case of a student who's tied down with classes and maybe also
Mm-hmm.
has a job. Okay, that I'd understand. But there are a lot of people who have overstayed their visas for 20 years. They've had 20 and Representative Jordan was on a debate last week, and he brought up
Mm-hmm.
this point. There are people who are here for 20 years, and they haven't tried to make good, and they've had 20 years to do so, and that's actually a lot of people, not just a few students that didn't understand that they had to renew it or it ran out suddenly in the middle of a semester.
Yes. Um, and I understand that. And what I'm arguing is not every case is the case of someone who's illicitly been here for 20 years and is cackling in a corner about being there to trick the government. Um,
I
exactly.
got you.
Uh, most undocumented immigrants are usually not in that case. And we're not saying the same thing for everybody because that's not just. Uh, Being equitable is just. So you apply the proper consequences given a situation. Someone who's been here for 1 or 2 years over their visa stay should be treated much differently than someone who's been here 1 or 2 decades past their visa.
And I tend to agree. People who have really overstayed and made no attempt to should just be deported. They had their chance and they blew it. Um, thank you as
I don't know if I would go that extreme, but I'm glad we can find some middle ground at least.
at least. As always, thank you for being on this show, Dr. Jackson.
Of course, Alan, this has been fun.
TedderVision Capitol Hill is a free online simulation game, and you can find it on TedderVision.com. It's really cool. You can play as a representative, run for run for Senate, run for the presidency one day, or end up in the cabinet, maybe end up a Supreme Court justice. It's really fun, and you should try it out. A lot of people listen to our podcast but aren't yet players on our game. You should come check it out. It's really fun. You can find it on TedderVision.com. You can also find cool forums for just talking politics or talking about cat videos. Even a little change my mind section, so you can talk
Mm-hmm.
about current events and see if someone will change your mind on a big political issue. You can find it all at TedderVision.com. TedderVision.com.